Lovers. We are so happy to be here with you again, celebrating our African storytellers. And today we have none other than the incredible and deeply insightful Barbara Mutedzi. Barbara, how are you doing?
I am very well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm starting to get a bit caught unawares by the change in weather. So it's
Right.
getting warmer and warmer. And like I'm starting to see people like come to Zoom calls without like their jackets and like people wearing t-shirts in the afternoons. And so it's really interesting to me because I still get those moments in the night, like when you're in bed where it's super cold, and you're like, oh, maybe I do need that pair of socks. So I'm still kind of like wrapping my head around that change of season because I feel like it was just the other day we were in a cold front.
Yeah, it was pretty cold last week, especially over the weekend.
Mm.
And I feel like the temperature drops a little bit when you come indoors as opposed to outside. So you might be
Mhm.
wearing socks and warm clothes inside, but as soon as you step out, it's quite warm. So yay for summer.
Yeah, and you look absolutely gorgeous and summery. So, I'm happy that you're heralding in the summer for all of us. That could do with some outdoor love. Even with social restrictions, it would just be nice to be outdoors and, enjoying that weather. Um, so, without further ado, I would like to welcome all of our Facebook and YouTube watchers. I'd like you to say hi to us. If you're watching, just drop in the comment box hi, where you're watching from, and let us know if you've got any questions for Barbara, and we'll make time for her to answer them during this live broadcast. So, for those of us who are meeting Barbara for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about Barbara Mutedzi. She's a conscious leadership coach and human catalyst, helping people harness and control the power they have within themselves to lead a life of happiness. Using her academic and professional experience in psychology, anthropology, neuroscience, and consciousness, Barbara helps people define with increasing clarity what they would like each area of their lives to look and feel like. From there, she helps them design a roadmap to keep them on track whilst purposefully cultivating and habits and practices that will help them display and accelerate their progress. And on Barbara's various social media handles and her website, designyourlifefoundation.com, you can actually find out a lot more about that very deep but truly rewarding process. Specific to leaders and business owners, whom I know personally Barbara has worked a lot with in her illustrious career, she helps them sharpen their conscious leadership skills for high performance, impact, and long term return on investments. In addition to all the above, Barbara is an author, a transformational speaker, and facilitator of workshops and conversations related to human capital, connection, and growth. And if you want to know more about what Barbara is doing daily and how she does all of that, that I just described in her bio, you can follow her, find her on LinkedIn, Barbara Mutedzi, Conscious Leadership Coach. She's got 43 articles up there. And some of the stuff to do with leaders and business owners will be really, really relevant there. She also has a thriving Instagram and Facebook page. Instagram is Barbara Mutedzi. Facebook is Design Your Life with Barbs. Isn't that sweet? And Twitter, B Mutedzi. So you can find Barbara on all of those, and I'll keep sharing those with you for anyone who would like to maybe refine and design their life and their roadmap to success with Barbara going forward. So, Barbara, you write academically, personally, and professionally as an author. When did you start writing and why?
I don't remember exactly when I started writing, but I can tell you that I've always been an avid reader. So my primary school, I spent all my free time in the library. Like literally, the library was my friend. And, I don't know if you remember the books by Enid Blyton called The Famous Five. Those were my favorite books in primary school. And I think I read everything in those series. And then with time, I started journaling because I'm an introvert, so I like spending time by myself. And I was an only child for 9 years as well, so I had no one sort of to play with, and parents were always at work, as they should be. And so journaling and reading was something that I really cultivated from a young age. And then I remember in high school, I was actually a librarian. In my early 20s, I started reading quite a bit as well because we had a home library. My mom was an avid reader, and she made it a mission for everyone to read, and not in a strict way, but we just had like really fun books to read in the house, and then we'll talk about it. And then in my mid 20s to late 20s, I thought I'm just going to go out and figure my life out and start exploring and understanding this whole world that I was reading in my in the books and in the library. And then with time, just sort of progressed from understanding who I was as an individual, where I wanted to go. And I did that more through academics, so psychology, because I grew up with some not so great background as a young child, and I was trying to figure myself out. And because there was no one else to talk to, psychology felt like it had all the answers for me at that stage. So I did an undergrad in psychology. Then I got even more inquisitive because a lot of people would say something, especially the adults at that stage, would say something but do something opposite. So that confused me. And half the time it was because, oh no, that's what culture says. So I got interested in anthropology, which, as you know, is study of people and culture, because I really wanted to understand what this culture was that people seemed to use as a crutch. And then with time, I really was a high performer and I was big on mindset. So I studied what is called neuroscience-based coaching. It's a big word. You don't need to remember that. But basically what it is a study of the mind and the brain and how we can use them for higher performance, because I always wanted to do well in whatever venture that I went into. So along the way, the writing started from journaling, and then it went into book writing and then into articles. On a personal level, it was more conversations with myself in my head and in my mind that I really just wanted to put on paper, because as soon as I put something on paper, it made more sense. There was more logic to it, and I could always come back and reflect on it and see the growth that was going on. So it felt like the journal was my buddy and my friend, and I loved that. And because I was an only child, I had plenty of time to do the writing and reading. And then as I went into academics with psychology and anthropology and neuroscience, you obviously, if you've gone through higher education, there's a lot of reading of articles. And the beautiful thing about having grown up in the library is I could now bring all those aspects together to make sense for myself and all my peers. And so having conversations with other people using the academic background was very helpful. And then accumulation of all of that into the business world made it so much easier because I've accumulated so much knowledge over the years. Obviously not enough. We will never stop learning, right? But I have accumulated much more compared to my peers, if I could use that as an example. And so it's so easy to then just package things and see the world from a different viewpoint. Because when we walk out into the world, we see the world from our social cultural lenses. So the way we were raised, what we were exposed to, that's how we see and unfortunately judge the world. But when you read and when you write and when you put your thoughts on paper, you have like a clear canvas where you can now start seeing, okay, maybe this lens is not so great. Maybe this one might work on this space. Where can I find a lens that can show me this part? So life becomes an adventure. And I think it did start with those Enid Blyton famous 5 adventure stories. So yeah, it's been a while. I've been doing this for over 3 decades, so loving it.
Well, I mean, you have a rich body of work to show for those 3 decades of reading, but also writing. And I love what you said about how the reading actually helps to open up your mind to new perspectives. I like to think of it almost like enlightenment. I was a fan of Enid Blyton, Famous 5. and then other franchises like Secret Seven, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, loved those growing up. And really lived different lives through those characters, traveled to many different places, and engaged in many amazing adventures. And I think what that does for you is it starts to open up your mind to possibilities about what can be. Whereas from some of the things you said, there is an aspect in culture or wanting to pin down and define identity where it's more restrictive. It's more about what you can't do, finding who you are and what you can't do. So that's very, very powerful and very, very interesting. In terms of all of the places you write, so you've got your articles on LinkedIn. You also have a blog on Medium, okay, where you also write quite dedicatedly. You are contributor or published in journals. So academically, and you've got academic articles, and this is both in the NGO space and what we would properly call academia. And then you've actually self-published and authored 2 books, which are available on Amazon. The first book you wrote was Am I Insane, Black, or Just a Woman? It's available on Amazon at a very, very reasonable price, but it's also quite reasonable if you buy it from Kobo Books. So Kobo Books will afford you can get an e-version on Kobo right now, and it's very, very accessible. Then the second book is Advocating for Children and Adolescents Living with HIV in Harare, and that's also available on Amazon. So those are 2 very different types of books. So I'm curious to know, even though you've been doing it for a very long time, how are you writing so extensively in so many different formats and in so many different genres? How do you manage that as a writer?
So one of the things that I have done very well from a young age is I've run away from being put in a box to say, well, you're a female or you're Black or you're tall or you're white or whatever it is, because it always felt restrictive. And all of those are, social cultural norms where it said, because you look like this, or because you're this age or this gender, this is what you should do. Let's unpack social cultural. When we say, society does this and does that, society is other people. That's what it is. And other people give you advice from the advice they were given by other people, and so on, right? And no one is perfect. So when someone gives us advice, we take what works and leave what doesn't, because generations change and everyone is so beautifully different. So we have to walk a different journey each time. Culture is rules and laws that have been put in place, hopefully to keep us safe. So society, other people, culture, rules and laws made by other people. But we're all individuals. I do believe that we are spiritual beings and we are connected as spiritual beings who are living a human life. And when I talk about spiritual, I'm not talking specifically about religion. Whatever you call your higher power, your intuition, your God, your Allah, whatever it is, that's what I call encompassed in spiritual. So spiritually, we are all connected. It's like with trees. When you look at trees above the ground, they're all individuals, right? But if you were to dig underground, their roots are connected. So that's the concept of Ubuntu. We are all connected, right? So, but on the surface, we look different, which is great. So now for me, I have been able and continue to write in different spaces because I don't want to just call myself an academic or just an anthropologist or just a psychologist or just a coach. I can be all of those things. Like, why not? Why should I fit into boxes? Why should I do something because I'm a certain age? Why should I do something because I'm of this gender? If I choose to do it, awesome, because it's my choice. And the privilege I've had as well is I have grown and understood what my life purpose is from a very young age. So my life purpose is to help other people harness and control the power they already have within themselves to live their life purpose. And if they are not sure what their life purpose is, I help them figure that out. Because the thing is, when you use your life purpose as your guiding torch or tool to whatever you do, it's never a straight road. And your purpose, you can get to your purpose in different ways. You might have different professions. You might have, different sort of relationships in your space, whatever it is. As long as your purpose or your target is the same, you can get there through different ways. So for me as a coach, as a teacher, as a mentor, I teach in different spaces. I teach young people, I teach older people, I teach people of different genders. And so when I can speak their language, I use that. So because I love writing, I love journaling, I love writing personal stuff as if we're sitting across the table together, it just flows, right, for me, because I'm just spewing out my thoughts as a human being. And then when it's an academic space, they have their own language. I have that background because I've got a master's in anthropology, which is research-based. Actually, the second book you mentioned, the one on advocating for children and adolescents living with HIV in Harare, that was my thesis paper at master's level that I turned into a book. And the reason I was focused on HIV was also because my biological mom passed away from AIDS. And I was also running a project called Chiedza for young children out of our local hospitals, Parenyatwa and Harare Hospital, providing psychosocial support for them, all the children who are living with HIV. So it's, when I talk about getting out of boxes, it's laying out all your tools, because we all have a life toolbox that we fill up with as we go along life. So whatever is in that, lay it out on the table. Take out what works for you at whatever stage and use that. Don't be limited to say, I should do that, I should do this. If we're to use Christian language, for example, you are a gift from God, and God is a gift to you. God is part of you and you're part of God. So when you limit yourself, you're limiting the gift and the power of God who is within you, right? So it's about not so much saying you have to go against what other people are saying, but weighing to see, does this feel right for me? If it doesn't feel right, okay, maybe I shouldn't do it this way. Let me try it this way. And then being able to explain it to other people. Because I know sometimes it's difficult to sort of explain to other people who are looking after you, for example, if you're of a younger age, to say, this is the direction I want to go. Here's what you can do. Read a bit more, share that information with them. Go find other people who've walked that similar path or who've passed through that path, and ask them what you can do to bring out all your talent and your skills. You know, the beautiful thing about being a human being is that we are dynamic, which means we change each day. We don't have the same cells we had when we grew up. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago because of COVID, actually. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago. This afternoon, I was frustrated with my computer because it wasn't working, because I put a privacy setting on it and I couldn't figure it out. But this evening, I'm happy, I'm jovial, I'm speaking to everyone on the same computer that was stressing me out this afternoon, because things change. But we do have the power to interpret what it means to us and to embrace all of who we are, because no one knows when they're going to die. If you're going to die in 5 years, you can say, okay, this year I'll do this. This year I'll do that. Year 3, I'll do this. Year 4, I'll do that. And then year 5, I'll do that. Then I'll die. But we don't know when we are going to die. So why not be the best version that you can be as much as you can and from what you know? And if you need more information, find out how you can get that information. So for me, trading on all of those places is because I also have an interest in them. And I have no interest in following rules and regulations that were made by other people, which might have worked in the past and which might work for other people. But at the end of the day, we are also beautifully different above the surface. So why not embrace that? And the more we walk in our light and, choose the tunnel that we want to walk in and then light it up, as opposed to waiting for the light at the end of the tunnel, which might not even be the right tunnel for you, then life becomes so exciting and you become an example for everyone else around you. So that's my way of thinking.
Well, I mean, you're definitely throwing yourself into the many different tunnels that you are dovetailing and lighting them up in your own special way. We've got some viewers from Facebook. Tatenda Tom, very insightful and educative. I love her. Thank you, Tatenda. We appreciate you tuning in and telling us your thoughts on the discussion so far. And then from YouTube, Sappy and Norman. Norman saying hello from Zoom. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. So just to go back to some of the things that you were saying, I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about your first book. Am I insane, black, or just a woman? So very interesting, your definition of insanity in the book, or rather insane, which is the insanity of everyday living. And the chaos that leads to normality. Very, very interesting, very interesting title there. But also the other terms or labels in the title are also unpacked through your memoir. And in this book, just like you've talked about, you lay it all bare. So you tell us about the very first thing that you do is you kind of give us a family tree. And it's written almost in Old Testament style chronology. So and so begot so and so begot so and so, and you give us the full layout of what you're calling your first family and the full layout of what you're calling your second family. And then you begin to unpack that. And much like you've discussed and described, you really did just give us your honest thoughts in a very intimate way, as if you were, I would say, having a coffee with a very close friend. Those long conversations that start during the day and sometimes end in the evening when the sky has darkened because you're really chewing the fat. And that is kind of how your book reads. It's how your book kind of flows, and it's what it feels like, because you are very open when you are questioning yourself, even in terms of some of the things that you're saying. I mean, you even have a chapter in the book around, should I write the book or not? So let's start with insanity, the insanity of everyday living, the chaos that leads to normality. Tell us a little bit more about that. Sorry, Barbara, just unmute your mic.
I forgot. Oh my goodness. Anywho, I was just saying that I laugh each time that I read the title of this book, because I don't know where I got it from, but it does make sense, because as a child, adults say and do something. I'll give an example of church. People go to church, praise and worship, all this activity in church, and then Monday to Sunday, they consciously sin. And then it's like a cycle. So I was so confused growing up and as an only child with no one to speak to, I didn't know how to ask these questions. But I would see adults sort of doing something, but then they would say something else. And I'm thinking, am I the only one who's seeing and hearing this? Is there something wrong with me? Like, surely this is insane. Like, why are you, like, I don't get it. And it did come across as insane, because when you sit back sometimes and really watch what's going on in the world and the tragic things that are happening all over the world at the moment, with COVID in Afghanistan, with Black Lives Matter, with all the gender disparities that have been happening over the years, it's all because of the decisions that we make on an everyday basis. They might seem like they're small decisions, but collectively they're huge. And so we're living with these consequences. And when we are making the decisions, we don't actually sometimes think about what we are doing, because we're so focused on this very second, and not so much what does that have to do I never know how to say this word properly, generationally, right? So we don't think about us as a collective. And it all starts with education. Our formal education is about competing with another person. Who's the first one in class? If it's sport, who's the first one, who wins the race, whatever it is. Now, there's nothing wrong with healthy competition. But then what we then do is we start comparing ourselves with another person to the point where we think, oh no, there's something wrong with us, as opposed to using that other person as an example to say, oh, hey, that's another human being. If they're able to do this thing, with all their strength and all their passion that they have, then if I want to do something else, if I put in the same passion and the same energy, I can also achieve something else. So that's a healthy sort of comparing, but not competition. And with insanity, it just makes people stop and start their lives in a way that's not cohesive, in a way that actually makes them even miserable. And as a child, that was so confusing to me, because what I was reading in the books was so different from what was actually being acted out in the world. And there was such a disjoint from, living in also a low-resourced country and then reading all these information from other countries. And I was never really exposed to local books. I think the first time I started reading local books were in upper six, because it was part of my literature classes. It was actually, there was Harvest of Thorns, and I've actually got the other one on my bookshelf by Tsitsi Dangarembo. I've just forgotten the title. But we were never exposed to a way of life where we harnessed our culture in terms of understanding where it came from. Because what I saw as a disjoint with the adults was they were living in the middle, the Western part and the African part, not understanding completely either side. So there was no foundation. And so everything just felt so inconsistent. And it did look insane. And we still make decisions that are not grounded in who we are as human beings. And so we get lost in everything. So yeah, as a child, I kept thinking, like, I don't understand this. What's going on? Like, this surely is not okay. Like, why are we not speaking about this? So it did look insane.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you do, I think, very interestingly, for me, though, as a reader of the book, is that you are telling us the story of your life, right? And so it's part biography, but more memoir. So there's that layer. Then there's the layer where I think you are intentionally unpacking some of the things that you're identifying as insane. So you're looking at some of the traditions or norms rooted in culture, and you're questioning them and you're comparing them with other parts of the world. And so you're having that conversation almost as if you were having it with yourself in relation to specific incidences that happened, like, for instance, with your mother from your first family, and incidences that then happen in your second family, and just your journey as Barbara in the world. So there's that, and you're moving between those, and kind of having the conversation, inviting us into the conversation, and then also making decisions about, for you, where will you stand and where will you not stand. And one of the other discussions that you have in the book, that's very much like along that, or one of the other layers, is the issue of race. And that's you had a very traditional, almost strong cultural impression in your first family. And then in your second family, there was a sense of othering them and othering towards yourself. And then you guys being something that was othered in both, different types of cultures in that dynamic. And can you tell us a little bit more about the race journey and the Black journey? Because to me, I found that very interesting that you were so frank about it. But I mean, I also feel like you also talked about it from a place where, I know you talk about doing the book as a journey to healing, but you also do it from almost a pragmatic and philosophical place as well.
It was an interesting process. So for those who are not so familiar with my background, my biological parents, my dad died when I was 6. So I don't remember him a lot because I was very young. And then my mom died when I was 16. And then there was a period of about 4 years where I was sort of alone and going to high school for 2 years. And then after that, went back home to look after my younger brother, who is 9 years younger than I was. And after that kind of sort of messy setup, I then got absorbed into a second family who've got a white background. So my mom is American, dad is British, who've stayed in Zim for a while. Dad came, I think, in the late 70s, just before the war ended. And then mom came in the 90s. And so they met here in Zim, actually, and got married. And then my mom knew my biological mom. So my mom now knew my biological mom before she died. And they became very close friends. So I think there was some sort of discussion around, please look after my kids somehow. I don't know how that discussion went, because my mom knew she was going to die. And so when I got absorbed into this white family, it was very jarring because none of us had been in the same household for long periods of time with someone of another race. So I was the first Black child in the family. And they were my first and only parents, white parents. And so it wasn't difficult. It was interesting and confusing at the same time because we didn't know how to relate. But we managed it as a family. However, for other people on the outside, it was difficult. So you would have other people come in of any color, and they would say hello to everyone else who was white. And then they'd come in front of me, this Black African child, and not literally know what to do. Should I hug her? Should I kiss her? What should I do? And for me, it was interesting in the beginning because I myself also didn't know what to do. Because in our culture as Africans, it was about, just go in and give the hug. It's a friend, it's a relative, you know them, give them a hug, carry the bags, love on them. But this was a different culture. They did that, but because of the differences in color that was clearly visible, there was no clear rules on what would happen. But with time, I realized, actually, let me just do what I've always done. So I would go in for the hug, and then people sometimes would not know what to do with that, and then they got used to me because I'm just me. Or, for example, there was a time, the first time I traveled to the States with my family, I would go into a supermarket, and my little sister, who was white, clearly, she was a toddler, and we would walk in the supermarket, and I'll sort of follow her just to make sure she was okay, and then mom would be doing her shopping and stuff. The shopkeepers would follow me, and that felt odd because I thought, I'm not buying anything. You can see I'm running after a toddler. Mom is the one who's buying something. She's the one who's needing something. So I didn't know it as racist then, but when I look at it, it does feel like it was racist. That didn't make me comfortable. It just made me uncomfortable and confused because I really didn't understand that. And then even in our own country in Zimbabwe, so my younger sister is now taller than I am, blonde, beautiful young lady. When you go to a supermarket, people are, the till operators, Black people, are more friendly toward her than to me until I take out my cash or my card because I'm the one who was working and I'm paying. Then they change their attention to me. So it's like when she walked into her world, things were easier for her. There was no having to try and fit into spaces. Whereas as a Black person, when I'm walking with another white person, I see that they get the better treatment. I have to be extra lovely and big smiles and friendly to the till operators for them to pay me a little bit of attention, so that I can ask, how much is this? Where can I get this? And all of that stuff. So it's still happening now. It's all over the world. It's these subtle things that we don't talk about, but they are just aggressions. They're microaggressions, and they build up. And at some stage, it's just too heavy to carry, and it's not okay. So I'm very vocal about talking about color and race, because when we see each other as human beings first, because when you cut me, when you cut another person, what comes out is blood, red blood. We are the same. As spiritual beings, we're all connected. We are all connected. The dress I'm wearing today, the material was made somewhere else. It was dyed somewhere else. The food I'm eating, it came from somewhere else. I wouldn't be able to eat if, other people weren't planting. I would have to maybe cross oceans to go get some of the food that I'm eating, and I can't do that, right? So we are all interconnected in so many ways. So for me, I love having the discussion about race and Blackness and whiteness and brownness and all of that to remove those titles, because what we should be looking at is, if you see me as a human being first, before anything else, then all the other things are just beautiful extra roses on top. But we have chosen to look at the differences more than what's inside. And I suppose because of my background, it makes it easier for me to talk about these subjects very openly and very easily. But I do encourage other people to just start talking about it. Just say, hey, this situation is making me uncomfortable. What can we do to make sure we're both okay? And even with my little sister, when all the whole Black Lives Matter happened, we talked about it. And in the beginning, it was kind of difficult and we're both hesitant because I now was saying, hey, look, it's blown up all over the world. But let me show you what used to happen even in our own country, even in our own family, even in our own country, because now you really understand how all these microaggressions build up to become this big thing. So as long as we hold on to we are interconnected beings and we see and respect each other as human beings, we will be okay. But as long as we compete, we compare, we lower ourselves in our self-talk, we'll never get there. And it's going to take time. I don't expect it to happen overnight. So I'm very privileged to have gone through that kind of background for me to then be vocal and talk about diversity and inclusion and equity, even in workspaces. It's not about hiring more women. It's not about hiring, more gay people. It's not about hiring someone who's transgender. It's not about that. It's about hiring a human being with the skills without saying, oh no, but we just want to focus on this race or this gender or this whatever. It's about equity, not equality, because we can never be completely equal in this capitalist world that we're in. But equity is so important. And that's different. And that also leads us to that last part of the book, right? Where it's, I'm just a woman. And, growing up in a largely patriarchal society, there's so many things that happen that sometimes it's so confusing to say, so are you saying that you will pay me less because I am a woman? Are you saying that you will pay me less because I don't have a family at home, my own family, my own kids, a husband? And so you don't think I should have all that money, because it would just sit there? Because you're assuming that our culture says because you're not married or you're a single woman or you're just a woman, then you should get less. Again, it's not about equality, it's about equity. And this happened recently in a big organization, actually, in the middle of a negotiation with one of the HR director of 16 organizations. He says to me, Barbara, the reason why you're asking for all this money is because, I need to find you a man. You wouldn't be asking for all this money if you had a man. And I'm thinking, excuse me, this is, if we were out for coffee and you mentioned that, not that that's even an okay statement, even out to coffee, I might sort of then say, no, this is not okay. But this is in the middle of a contract, a negotiation, and you say that. So that's gaslighting me, right? So if I did not have self-confidence, I would go home and think, maybe I am asking for too much. But then actually, I did my research. I know how much this job should pay. I know what I will deliver. I'm very clear on paper. I'm very articulate. So if you're going to be saying things like that, and by the way, this person has a background as a pastor. So then for me, it's like, oh my goodness, how many women are going through this in organizations and in churches? And how many churches do we have across this continent? So that worries me to say, we do need to have these conversations, not because we're saying just give me stuff. I have got the qualifications. I have broken it down on what I will provide. I've asked you, is there anything else that I can do to help you achieve your goal? So that it becomes a win-win, right? But we've lost the way that we relate. It's all about what can I take, and not so much about how can we come together to build for other people, including ourselves. So this book, for me, when I wrote it, I don't think I totally understood the depth of what I was talking about at an early age, because I took this book and wrote it from journal entries that I started when I was very young. But because I had a lot of time to reflect as an only child, and also being a quiet person, I can see how it's led me to be a coach for other people, to just help them realize that, listen, yes, other people will say other things, but if you listen to that intuition, that inner voice that we all have, but unfortunately has been dumbed down and the volume has been reduced, but by what we've been exposed to as we grow up, it's difficult for us to actually hear it. And so it's important for us to cultivate that voice. And the way we can do that is whatever your spiritual practice is, whether it's meditation, whether it's prayer, a walk in the woods, whatever brings you into centerhood so that you can have that quiet time to really just reflect on what's going on in your mind and in your life, and then to take from that what feels right moving forward, because the language of the soul and the language of the spirit are your feelings. Our words, they have a ceiling. So I might say one word, you might say another word, and we might experience that word differently. So whatever you feel about something, use that as a guide. If something that does not feel right, don't do it, or go explore a bit more, understand it a bit more before you dive into it. If it feels great and glorious and joyful and happiness, jump right in, because your soul and your spirit are like leaving little breadcrumbs along your life path toward your life purpose. So it doesn't matter if you don't know what your life purpose is. Follow the things that you're curious about. Do the things that bring you joy more often, because all of those, I promise you, are your spirit whispering in your ear, leaving all these little breadcrumbs to say, hey, try this side. Hey, try that. Hey, try engaging with that person or that company, or try this activity. All of that is speaking volumes and increasing the volume of your intuition. So it's so important to make sure that you have that quiet time, whether it's 10 minutes a day, half an hour, whatever it is, because there's no one else like you. No one else. There's only one you. So why not cultivate that so we can all benefit from that? And yeah, that's where this book came from. And I'm getting deep now, so I'm going to stop for now for your next question. But I've loved rereading and sort of looking through this book again.
Yeah, I bet you would, because when we talked about this book, before the show, you talked about how it was a healing. It really just it was always for you, and then it evolved, and then it became the book that you published. And I find that very interesting, because I think when you keep coming back to a story or a narrative like that, it's like me now talks to me that I was then. And we have a conversation. And in that conversation, sometimes future me shows up. And then we're all having this powwow. And that conversation looks different, although the words on paper look the same. And that's all to do with our feelings and how I think we change how we feel about our feelings over time. And I think we enter into different truths that way. So very, very interesting, and loved to hear you talk about that. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our interview time, and I really want to make sure that before we sign off today, we hear some words from the book. So as is our custom, at the end of every book club, we always ask the author to read an excerpt from their work. And I know that you've prepared something for us from the book, Am I Insane, Black, or Just a Woman? A title I think many women actually, or many African women would resonate with. Just the title on its own. They'd be like, yeah, let's talk about that. But from the book, please share with us your reading today.
I keep forgetting to unmute. Okay. So I'm going to read from chapter 3. Do I really want to write this book? More so to encourage all those writers to continue writing. And if you're thinking about writing, please go ahead and do it. This is just a three small paragraphs of what I was thinking. And, when I was writing, in the middle of writing this book, already on chapter 3, and this is what was going on in my mind. So, do I really want to write this book? Well, it's a bit late for me to be asking that question, especially on chapter 3. I mean, come on. The big thing here is I have always wanted to write a book, but I never thought I could. I mean, I could write. I keep a diary, which, unless it has 20 million pages, doesn't usually last. Because I'm an avid reader and writer, I also spend a lot of time alone. So my diary is my friend. That's how much a good writer I am. If only we could all be great writers from keeping a diary. But the fact is, we are. We are all just too chicken to write a book. We most likely think that it's someone else who has all the luck or who is better, and our book won't be read by anyone. Let me tell you a little something, my dear mind. We are all worth something. Even if it took you too long to figure that one out, in this wonderful world we live in, there's always going to be someone richer, more beautiful, and more prosperous than you are. What we need to do is to stop comparing ourselves with other people. Compete with yourself. Because if you compete with others, once you beat them, then what? Find another person to compete with? That just means your life is always going to be going up and down, stop and start with no direction. Get a life, will ya? I'll stop there.
Very nice. And I think a very nice kind of sign off for the book club. I know that we get a lot of budding writers who are always curious and want to hear from people like yourself who've done it before. And I think that is just a powerful message to send to maybe women who are wondering if they're insane or just Black or just a woman, and, you know, who want to write about that, because I bet we could come up with some really rich and diverse stories. You know, there's a saying from the Bible that there's nothing new under the sun, but in the writing world, we then tag on, except for you. You're the one and only you. And so all of those things that are not new under the sun, when filtered under the one and only you, make a pretty compelling story. If you give yourself to the journey, and obviously if you listen or follow the breadcrumbs. So thank you very much, Barbara, for sharing that with us. And to all those that joined us and that were shocked by Barbara's revelations, but also inspired and motivated by her revelations, thank you for joining us for yet another fascinating book club with another amazing African female author. We will be back here next week, Wednesday, same time on Facebook and YouTube with our next conversation for the month of August. In the meantime, stay safe and follow the things that give you joy. They are leading you to your life purpose. Thank you, Barbara.